So much of the world has been upended since the start of the Iran war. Anyone who had never heard of the Strait of Hormuz at the start of the year now knows exactly where it is. Today, we're going to take a closer look at East Asia and the realignment that is taking place there, thousands of miles away, because of the fighting in the Middle East, because of the domino effect the conflict has created. China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan are all making military and political adjustments to the changing global security picture.
Well, we're definitely seeing a lot of hedging, aren't we? We're seeing a lot of countries that once took that relationship with the US completely for granted, now looking at how else they can hedge their bets. And in particular, we're seeing a lot more military spending, a lot more people developing domestic weapons. We're seeing countries that are moving those systems around, and countries that are just spending more on defense and taking that a lot more seriously.
That's DW East Asia correspondent Rik Glauert speaking to us from our Taipei bureau.
Just to give you a picture of what it looks like here, all of these countries are in the first island chain, that band of countries that faces China, that are all kind of US aligned and are really part of the US's posture in the region. You've got South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines. And as the world gets more unstable, as China becomes much more military assertive, shall we say, these countries are really thinking about how they can build that defense, how it works both alone with the US and also more increasingly with other like-minded countries in the region.
Both alone or with the U.S. Did you catch what Rik said there? For decades, U.S. partners such as Japan, South Korea, Taiwan would never imagine having to defend themselves alone. But with American superpower resources moved to the Middle East once again, like how many times over the past 2 decades? East Asia is realizing it has to really plan for a future without the U.S.
In terms of the interconnectedness in the region, there's a lot of history in East Asia, quite a bit of animosity between different countries. But we are seeing signs that countries are more willing to work together. We saw that big meeting between Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi and her South Korean counterpart, and that famous video of them playing drums together, which shows some bonhomie. Obviously, Taiwan is in a bit of an awkward position because it struggles to have normal diplomatic relations with other countries because of that pressure from China. But there is more communication going on between countries. I mean, one thing I would also point to is that there's some really big US and Philippine military drills going on in the Philippines, which is obviously just to the south of Taiwan. These are annual drills, and they often have other militaries from around the world taking part. And this year, for the first time, Japanese troops are actively taking part. There's boots on the ground, Japanese boots on the ground in the Philippines for the first time since World War II. And that is really kind of a signal that allegiances are shifting, that people are going to have to be working together in this region. There's also a lot more communication with so-called like-minded countries like New Zealand and Australia.
Rik says one of the biggest reassessments is happening in Seoul, where the U.S. military has a big foothold, with more than 20,000 active duty members of the American military spread across more than half a dozen bases. That's not a situation that would be easy for the U.S. to just pick up and move out of. But even in South Korea, there are jitters.
The bad news for a country like South Korea is that with this focus on the Middle East, there is, of course, this wavering in that support from the US. And it's been really tangible in South Korea, where the US moved out a THAAD system, a THAAD. That's a really sophisticated missile that can help shoot down other missiles, which obviously the US had placed in South Korea to help counter that threat from North Korea. And the South Korean president was, he was kind of only able to say, yeah, we don't agree with it, but there's not much we can do about it. So I think you see with a country like South Korea, it's being hit economically, prices are going up there, but at the same time, it's also rethinking this long-held defense relationship it's had with the US, intertwined with the US, and rethinking how can it bolster its own defenses.
In Japan, big changes are happening, including a serious conversation about amending its constitution in order to build up its military.
Japan and its leader, Sanae Takeichi, who's really quite bold, quite nationalist, quite a hawk on China in particular, she has overseen quite a lot of bolstering of Japan's defenses, moving weapon systems around, and in particular, Japan has chosen to be spending more on defense, to be more strategic about its own defense, a message being that we are going to take our own defense seriously. And this is a really big move for Japan. Japan has this pacifist constitution since World War II, where it doesn't really have, can't really call its military a military, where the constitution says that it can only act in very specific circumstances in self-defense. And this is something that Japan is now really considering.
And the flame that might light up this entire region is, of course, Taiwan, which China wants badly. There's no other way to say it. Beijing would like to turn Taiwan into a province of the People's Republic of China, and Xi Jinping has been building up Chinese land, sea, and air power. Rik reminds us, if you think disruption in the Strait of Hormuz is bad for the world, you really don't want to know what it would be like if China invaded Taiwan.
And, I think this is really a wake-up call to everyone, that if there was a contingency in Taiwan, we would be seeing a disruption to the global economy, like we're seeing now with the conflict and the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, or even worse. So there's also that narrative coming from Taiwan, that this is a reminder of how the world is so interconnected now. The global economy is really reliant on all these different parts, and that if there was conflict in one region, it would quite easily affect the rest of the world.
But can it happen? That's the trillion-dollar question, whether we'd ever see open warfare in East Asia.
Well, this has been flagged as the next geopolitical hotspot. I mean, for the last few years, after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a lot of people were saying, oh gosh, if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, that sends a signal to China that it can take its move on Taiwan. All eyes were here on the first island chain, these countries that face China, about how a contingency of China attacking Taiwan potentially, or making some sort of move, not necessarily full-scale invasion, but it could be a blockade. Obviously, now we're in Trump 2.0, we've seen a lot of other big geopolitical flashpoints. We saw Venezuela, and now obviously this war in Iran. But that doesn't mean the risk's gone away. There is still, a lot of militarization going on in this region. China, it has been building up its military at an incredible pace. It's, nearly got the world's largest navy if you count the number of boats. It's building its nuclear arsenal faster than anyone. So this tinderbox here hasn't gone away just because other things are happening in the rest of the region.
And this goes back to what's happening in the Middle East, because Beijing has been watching developments unfold very carefully. Now, there's a lot of debate among security experts over how China interprets U.S. activity in the Middle East. With a planned meeting between President Donald Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping in a few weeks, Rik's take is that China feels pretty good.
I think China will be going into that, knowing that the US has potentially made a mistake in Iran, that has made, the US militarily perhaps weaker with such an expenditure of weapons systems, of missiles, but it's also fractured a lot of the US's really important allies, obviously here in East Asia, but also in Europe. And I think, Xi Jinping will be going into that meeting feeling quite confident, knowing that he looks, just as much as a statesman as Donald Trump does, and he has every right to, really take control of the conversation about how he thinks the world should look.
So, what do you think? Is China winning geopolitically? And do you think Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan are making the right moves as they bolster their defenses? How might your life be impacted? Let us know in the comments. That's all for now. DW News is giving you the latest and also sharing deep dives on here and across the rest of social media. I'm Melissa Chan. Until next time.